Welcome to our study on the book of Romans. This is Sonship Establishment. This is session 24. And this is our third shot at it. We have been talking about suffering, and I wanted to make it clear that because you are a son, an adult, adopted son of your Heavenly Father, you do have liberty. You even have the ultimate liberty of rejecting what you read in Paul's epistles. You can do that. You can, to use the word in the table of contents, or I'm sorry, in the exhortation, you can despise what Paul is teaching you here. And when I mean that, I mean count it as worthless. You can look at that and say that doesn't mean anything and I don't like it. You can do that. And He will allow you to do that. You can. You can say no to the sufferings of Christ, which is the second category. You can say, like the Corinthians, I'm not going to go through those. Walk away from your sonship, and you will never experience those another day in your life. You can do that. By the way, you haven't yet experienced any of those. So I just don't want you to mistakenly think that if you walk away from sonship, suddenly your life is going to get better. It's not going to change at all. It's going to get worse before it could get better. Okay, but if you prefer your old way of thinking about suffering to what Paul is talking to you about here, you can certainly, you can go out and live every day like you're under Israel's program. You can. But here's what I would want you to know. And by the way, and you can pray about these things any way you want to pray about them. It doesn't matter what I put on a note taker. You can do that. And that's your choice to make. And I can't make that choice for you. But I do want to tell you two things about that. Number one, if you do, it will bring great joy to Satan, and it will grieve the Spirit who is within you. That is one thing for sure that will happen. Here's the second thing. It's not, no matter how you view this, none of these things are going to change. None of that is going to change. What God is not doing, He's just not doing. It doesn't matter what you and I believe about it. Are you with me? I'm saying, do you agree? Do you just understand what it is that I'm saying to you? Because I don't want you to get the idea, well, if I operate like I'm in Israel's program and I ask God to deliver me from something, then I want Him to deliver me, and I don't care about what Mike says. I just want to be delivered from it, so I'm just going to ask God to deliver me. You need to understand, He's not delivering you no matter what. That didn't make, how you approach this will not change what He is or isn't doing. That's why it's very dangerous to concoct a doctrine based on your own personal experience. You know, we talked about, the farmer that prays for rain, and how many times going up to North Texas do I see that sign up on marquees on churches? Pray for rain. Pray for rain. I hear that. People say, well, we're praying for rain. You have to understand that someone says, well, if we believe what you believe, then God's not necessarily just sending rain. No, He's not. He's not. Now, when it comes, you know what they all say? God answered our prayer. In fact, I was talking to someone the other day, and they were saying to me, we've been praying for rain, and we got a little bit, but it was just a little bit. It wasn't nearly enough. So now we're praying for more rain. God answered our prayer, but now we need more rain. I said, so God didn't know how much you needed? Was He just teasing you with it? Was He just trying to get your hopes up, only this is not really going to help our crops at all? What, is He just toying with you? This is how He operates? Really? And that's amazing to me. That because the circumstances don't fit their theology, it doesn't bother them a single day in their life. But one day, folks, listen to me, it's going to rain. One day it will rain. And for some folks, it'll be the day they wanted it. For another guy that's got hay on the ground, that'll be the day he didn't want it. And he'll go, well, I asked God for rain, so I'm just going to be grateful we got some rain. Well, I'm glad for your good attitude. But that's terrible theology. That's a terrible way to determine what God is doing today. You have to understand that when I lose my car keys, God, please help me find my car keys. You do understand, if I don't look where I left them, it won't matter how much I pray. You do understand that. And if I look where I left them, I don't need to pray. He said, well, if you pray, though, God will have you look where you left them. But that's not true. That's not true. I've lost keys that I have never recovered, ever. And back then I thought that way. And I made deals with God. I begged Him. You know, you don't look at me like you ain't never done it. I've done all that. I've prayed sincere, heartfelt, sacrificial prayers that were not answered. Yes, and please don't give me that stuff about all of my prayers get answered. Well, if it's a no, who cares? Really? You think that's a benefit? If the answer is no, isn't that as good as not getting an answer? By the way, how do you know the answer was no? You're assuming that. Are you following what I'm saying? No, you're assuming. You say, well, I didn't get it. Well, the other option, you didn't get it because he said no. Maybe you didn't get it because he's not doing that. Well, I prayed before and got it, but so has a Muslim and a Buddhist. Does that mean their God is real? Well, no, that doesn't mean their God is real, but it means yours is. You do realize how hypocritical that is. That's the way we prove God answers prayer, because I prayed it. Look, I got news for you. Next time you get sick, don't pray to get better. Just go to the doctor. By the way, you go to the doctor anyway, don't you? You say, well, no, sometimes I don't. But you always get well. Paul said it rightly. Gentiles are superstitious. And that's how we live our Christian lives. Superstitious. It's mumbo jumbo. Sometimes it works, and God did it. And if He didn't, then we can always pawn it off and say it wasn't His will. And you know what? The adversary is laughing about that and making a mockery of what God is really doing in this dispensation of grace. That's how shallow our Bible understanding is in these days. That when things don't work according to our theology, we never question it. And it's time. I'm talking about this to you, and you realize that can't be said probably in any other church in this city. Well, it could be said, but you'd only say it once and then they get rid of you. But you understand, folks, you're part of a very small group in which God has vested everything. He really has. I'm not trying to develop a cult. I'm not trying to develop some brainwashed small group. I'm trying to teach this Word exactly as it's written without changing one single word of the text. I'm trying to teach this Word without just telling you what it means, but by showing you what it says. And then I'm trying to encourage you to believe what you read, not what I tell you. It's not, well, I know the Bible says that we're supposed to pray this way, but really what I'm going to tell you is, you've seen for yourself, Paul doesn't tell you to pray that way. He doesn't. He hasn't. He is telling you something so different. And so I'm just taking this time at the first to say, you can reject this all you want to. God's not going to change what He's doing one whit. That won't make a difference. Because if you think, if I leave Sonship, and then when I pray for God to get me out of a jam, then, because, you know what, if I'm in Sonship, He won't do it. But if I'm not in Sonship, then I can pray for Him to get me out of a jam, and He will. He won't. You'll either get out of it or you won't. You say, well, it doesn't sound like God is doing anything. You can't say that, surely, because we just got through talking about the power of His grace and the ability to endure these things and to do even more than that. Yes? Okay. So, now returning back to where we are, sorry, I just have to say that because I know the policy of evil is going to work just that way. You get you thinking just that way. So I'm trying to warn you about that. That's really what that was all about. No one in this group has come to me and said, hey, if I don't believe what you say, then God will start answering all these prayers like I'm in Israel. God's never going to deal with you like He did Israel. That's just the end of it. You can pretend your way through the Christian life. Folks have done it for generations. But at the end, guess what? They're not going to be laboring with their Father in eternity. Okay. Colossians chapter 1. Here's what Paul is saying, and I want to take, again, all we're doing is we're looking at this thing about Paul's perspective of suffering. So here it is, Colossians 1:23. If you continue in the faith, grounded and settled, and be not moved away from the hope of the gospel, which you have heard, and which was preached to every creature which is under heaven, whereof I, Paul, am made a minister, who now rejoice in my sufferings for you, and fill up that which is behind of the afflictions of Christ in my flesh for His body's sake, which is the church. Paul understands that a lot of the things that he is suffering is for the direct benefit of the members of the church, the body of Christ. He's being made an example. And he says, I'm rejoicing in my sufferings for you. If you're Paul and God tells you, you're going to have to suffer this and this and this, and I'm going to tell you why. It's for that bunch in Monahans. If they told you that, would you be going, God, can't you just let them learn it on their own? Why do I need to go through it? Paul says, I rejoice in my sufferings for you. He wants to be made that example. He wants you to find the same comfort that he knows he's going to find. And then he goes on and says, and not just them at Colossus, not just the Colossians, but he says, but he fills up, that is, which is behind of the afflictions of Christ in His flesh for His body's sake. That's for the whole church. Paul is going through these things, and he's rejoicing in them. Well, that does take a different perspective. That really is something different. Paul understands there's a foundational difference between the programs. And God is providing us with the more excellent capacity to endure suffering to His honor and glory. Now I want to look at the endurance concept. So let's go back now to 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and let's read here in verse 6. And rather we be afflicted, it is for your consolation and salvation. Do you see now how that makes sense? Paul says, and rather we be afflicted, it's for your consolation. How is Paul being afflicted going to be any kind of consolation for them? Because he's going to show them exactly how he benefited by going through that, and that's how they're going to benefit. That's actually going to be for them. Which is effectual in the enduring of the same sufferings. He said, the things that you see me go through are the things that you'll go through, and the way you see me endure it is the way you're going to endure it. And it's effectual to produce the enduring of the same sufferings which we also suffer. Or rather, we be comforted, it is for your consolation. You're going to see us go through the sufferings, you're going to go through the suffering. You're going to see us get comforted, guess what? You're going to get comforted. With the same company. Does that make sense to you? So I'm just showing you here, Paul is talking about, these are the things that he's going through. He is going through it for their sake. So that gives us those two categories of suffering, and we've got them on the board, the sufferings of this present time and the sufferings of Christ. And I want to take you now to where Bud asked me the question in the last session, because you actually do see both categories of suffering in Romans 8. You don't get a title for both of them, but both of them are there, and you'll get to see how they're described very differently. Romans 8:18. For I reckon that the sufferings of this present time, so there's category number one, and you know what's included in that, are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. Now, this doctrine is going to take you all the way down to the end of the chapter. Yes, it's divided into 3 parts. We've talked about those. But the whole chapter has the same issue. Because what are those 3 parts doing? They're installing 3 godly virtues in you that will equip you to go into the curriculum. And the first one is patient endurance of the sufferings. And that's what you're looking at here in the beginning. But the other one is found down in verse 23. Let's take a look at it on the PowerPoint. And not only they, but ourselves also, which have the first fruits of the Spirit, we ourselves, I'm sorry, I told you that we're looking at the second part. We're not there yet. I'm actually going to enlarge on that sufferings of this present time. So let me correct that. So let me say it again so our thinking is straight. I thought the next verse was going to take us to show us the second one. But what I elected to do in the notes was to expound on that sufferings of this present time a little bit. So that's what we're doing. In a moment, we'll take a look further down. And not only they, but ourselves also, which have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves. And the groaning is a result, folks, of the suffering of this present time. Those things will make you groan. Have you ever had that happen? Brianna's doing that now behind the Iron Curtain. She's back there suffering while she's running the stuff back there. By the way, if you're groaning, then you're experiencing the sufferings, aren't you? Well, just saying. All this kind of makes sense. Now let's take this up and go further with it, because we cut it off in midstream. And not only they, but ourselves also, which have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting for the adoption, to wit, the redemption of our body. That's a part of your adoption. Why is he saying we groan within ourselves, waiting for the redemption of our body? Why does he say that? Why does he say that's what we're waiting for? Okay, well it is, huh? It is, all that's right. But this body, why does he say we're groaning, waiting for the redemption of our body, is because our body is not redeemed, and that's the suffering that we go through, isn't it? That's where the suffering. And by the way, when that body gets redeemed, guess how much suffering is left for you then? None. Absolutely none. And if your joint heir inheritance is hooked to your suffering with Christ, once you get a glorified body, how much more can you get? None. There you are. Now, this body, by the way, that's that earthen vessel that was mentioned earlier. This is that thing that groans because, by the way, the older you get, the more it groans. Okay, Ruby goes, that's right. Okay. But look, I know, you know what, when we're young, and you know what, doesn't matter what you do, in about 2 days you feel fine again. But man, when you get older, sometimes you get up and you don't feel fine. All you did was get up. But here's the thing. These bodies, we know that's the direction they're headed. I'm talking to you now about some of the things associated with the sufferings of this present time. Let's keep reading. Back to the PowerPoint, verse 24. For we are saved by hope, but hope that is seen is not hope. For what a man seeth, Why doth he yet hope for? You know, he's talking about the redemption of your body. You don't see that yet. But it is out there. It is something that you're counting on. Verse 25. But if we hope for that we see not, now again, I cut that off. But the issue is, I want to point out here, is that you're walking by faith, not according to the things which you can see, but according to the things that you can't see. Just like your impact is on things that are not seen, not things that are seen. So if you hope for that we see not, then what? Well, the Bible's going to tell you. If we hope for that we see not, then do we with patience wait for it. We're waiting for that. It is a hope. Some folks are in such pain every day, they're thinking, man, yeah, you are. You kind of think, man, I tell you what, I can't wait for the day when that happens, that this suffering is all going to be behind me. And it's going to be behind me never to return. Ever. And when that happens, oh boy. Okay. So what are we supposed to expect from the doctrine? That right there. The ability to patiently wait. That's what's supposed to be happening. The fortification of your inner man to handle the sufferings that come your way. So he is equipping us to cope with the tribulations. By the way, there's a song. And I thought, whoever wrote this song, I should have looked up the author, and I didn't do it. And I meant to. And I passed it up thinking I'd come back and do it. So don't ask me who it is, I don't remember. But those of you that were in church back when they used to sing hymns, remember that? Before the praise and worship kind of took over everything? There was a hymn that was written. And just look at the words of this and think about what Paul's pointing to here. When peace like a river attendeth my way. That's good times, right? Peace, okay? When sorrow like sea billows roll. Now, you know, sea billows, those are waves that come in one after another, after another. By the way, I do know the story behind this song. The guy that wrote, Spafford. That's right. That's right, Spafford. Thank you. I did know that at one time, but I couldn't remember it. When he wrote that song, his family had gone over on a ship across the ocean, and they were lost at sea. He got a short telegram saying, yeah, that was it. Everybody else was dead. And he sat down and wrote this hymn in response to that tragic event in his life. And he says, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, doesn't matter, Thou hast taught me. I really like the fact that he used that word in there, because that fits sonship perfectly. You have to be taught about this. Thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. And that's his inward man. He's not talking about, I'm not grieved. He's not saying I didn't suffer a loss. He's not saying I'm not going to miss them. He's saying, you've taught me, Lord, to say, I can go through this. It's well with my soul. Now, I don't know how much this guy understood about sonship, but that is ahead of about 99% of the preachers in this country. Because while we sang that hymn for I don't know how many years, none of them taught that doctrine. They taught, try to get God to bail you out. That's what they taught. Well, okay. And by the way, I think that's exactly what Paul is doing. Okay, now let me take you to 2 Thessalonians. Chapter 1, verse 3. We're bound to thank God always for you, brethren, as it is meet, because that your faith groweth exceedingly, and the charity of every one of you all toward each other aboundeth, so that we ourselves glory in you in the churches of God for your patience and faith in all your persecutions and tribulations that ye endure. Now I want you to notice what he's talking about here in verse 4. He says, so that we ourselves glory in you in the churches of God. Paul says about the Thessalonians, when I go to other churches, I use you guys as an example, and I hold you up. I glory in you in the churches of God for your patience and faith in all your persecutions and tribulations that ye endure. He said, I'm not holding you up as an example of how to get out of them. I'm holding you up as an example of how to endure them. You know, when people, can you imagine when Paul went into a place and somebody says, I'm not, look, nobody here has done this for a long time, but my aunt's having surgery, would you pray that God will guide the hands of the surgeons while they're doing that? Isn't that the way we used to do it? Yeah? I know somebody who says, well, I still do it. Okay. But look, God, pray that God will, and then just fill in the blank. Can you imagine, really, Paul would take that opportunity to say, let me tell you about the things the Thessalonian church is going through. And here's how they're responding to these tribulations. With patience and faith. Now, by the way, the Thessalonians fully understood this doctrine. They knew what they were putting on display when they did it. This was not, they didn't get there accidentally. They really did go through the sonship. And they were going, and by the way, where would you think most of their persecutions and tribulations, what category would you think most of them were coming from? Huh? Yeah, the second one, the sufferings of Christ, wouldn't you think? Because of where they are in their sonship, you would this would be the big one for them. And you know what? All they had to do was walk away, and all of that would go away. And then you know what? They'd be out from under the pressure. But they understood what was at stake here, and they understood what God was doing. And so I think that's why Paul says in verse 3, your faith groweth exceedingly. They had the ability to think on things they couldn't see. That's where faith comes in, remember? To hope for that which they see not and live according to that. And then in verse 4 he says, we ourselves glory in you. He says, in our vernacular we would say, man, I just couldn't be prouder of you folks. You know, y'all are doing it right. Y'all are getting it done. And your Father He's actually using what you're doing, and you're laboring with Him here. And that's a glorious thing. And so here, I don't think I gave it to you on the PowerPoint. Let me just look. Yeah, Paul says, I think you're through with your note taker, but he says they're an example, that they've emulated Paul, just as they were supposed to, by the way. They've learned the doctrine of 2 Corinthians. They were not asking to be delivered from those things. They patiently endured their persecutions and tribulations. They walked by faith. They had the eyes of their understanding open to see what their physical eyes could not. That's a pretty good list. And that's where I'm wanting this assembly to go to get to that place. And of course, that's Thessalonians. I know that's advanced doctrine for us, and we'll look at that, of course, when we get over there in the curriculum. But there is something, though, I want to point out to you, and that is that Paul is going to now begin to talk about what a special privilege it is to be able to suffer with Christ. To respond properly to this first category of sufferings, and then to have these second ones come on you. He's going to talk about what a special privilege that is. I want to show you a couple of things about this. First, we're going to go to 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 7. Timothy is going through some suffering. You would imagine that he is. He's a fully educated son. He's pastoring an assembly, and so the policy of evil is targeted, him and them. So let's read it here. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear. And that's exactly what had overcome Timothy. I'm going to talk about that spirit of fear in just a moment. But of power and of love and of a sound mind. In order for Timothy to function properly, he was going to have to overcome what the policy of evil was doing, and that was making him fearful. He's going to have to overcome that. So look what he says in verse 8. Be not thou therefore ashamed of the testimony of our Lord, nor of me as prisoner, but be thou partaker of the afflictions of the gospel according to the power of God. Now, the thing about this is, if you're a partaker, what does that mean? Yeah, you're involved in that, aren't you? You're right in it. And here's Paul. Look at Paul's admonition. I mean, I'm smiling and kind of laughing a little bit because in the human way of thinking, you look at this and you go, boy, Paul needs to work on his bedside manner. Because Timothy's going, man, I'm really getting broken up under this policy of evil. It's just crunching me and I'm just fearful. And Paul goes, you need to be a partaker of the afflictions. You need to get in there and get some of that. You always want to go, Paul, where's your bedside manner? Oh, Timothy, I feel so. He's like, get in there. Suck it up. Quit whining. I mean, that's almost the idea that you get there. But you know what? He's given Timothy the very best advice he can be given. This is not a quirk in Paul's personality. This is what Timothy really needs to do. Now, I think Timothy knows it. I think Paul's reminding him of something that sometimes when you get in the middle of it, you don't think about it sometimes. It's just overtaking you. And you just need to be reminded. Now, I want you to notice also, let's see. I don't guess it's in this one. Maybe it's going to, the power. The afflictions of the gospel according to the power of God. You remember we had two excellencies? We had the excellency of the knowledge of Christ, and then we had the excellency of the power. And now here's what Paul is going to talk about with regard to that. If this is a power that has excellency to it, then it's a power that excels. Guess what it excels? What is it that the power of God that Paul is going to talk to Timothy about putting on display? Be a partaker of the afflictions of the gospel according to the power of God. He knows about 2 Corinthians doctrine. He knows about the excellency of the power. So I didn't talk to you about it back there because I was waiting till we got here to talk about it. So what is that power excelling? And don't just think about it from Timothy's standpoint. Think about it from your own standpoint. The power to endure? It is a power to endure, but what is it excelling? If it's huh? Glory of God? No.
It's excelling how fast you grow, how fast you...
That's a true statement, but I think he has something else in mind. Think about this. Was there ever any other time that God put His power on display?
Oh, yeah, all the
time. Okay. Give me an example. Huh? Parting the Red Sea. That was an example of His power, wasn't it? Give me another example. Creation. Give me another. Water from the rock. Aren't those all examples of God's power? But when he talks about the ability to endure sufferings, Paul is going to call that the excellency of his power. Do you know what that means? It excels every other power. That's why I told you, there's no greater power, not even his creation power. Because no Bible writer uses the word excellency with regard to any other power God possesses or puts on display. Only one is called the excellency of the power, and it's with regard to enduring these sufferings. That's the biggest power God has. Remember, we talked about that way back. I told you this. That we would see grace as a power that exceeds even His ability to speak out of something out of nothing. And the reason I can say that is not just because I'm trying to make a point, but because of the use of this word right here. If it's the excellency, it doesn't get any more than that. If I come to you and I go, I need to borrow a car, and you go, take this one, this is the most excellent car we have. You wouldn't say it that way, but you know what you would mean by that? This is the best one we got. And I'm trying to say it that way so that you understand when he talks about the excellency of the power, there is no greater power. Now let me take you to the other excellency. The excellency of the knowledge, that I may know Him and the fellowship of His sufferings. Then guess what? There is no greater knowledge. How critical is this doctrine? He's got two... The doctrine of suffering carries two E's. Motels carry stars, right? Chefs have Michelin stars. This doctrine has two excellencies, two E's. Do you know anything that can outrank that? It has the excellency of the knowledge and the excellency of the power, and they're both wrapped up in the doctrine of suffering. It just doesn't go beyond that. Really? This goes fast to me. I know for y'all, you're going, please, it's been my birthday twice since you started. But for me, this goes really fast. So if you're a partaker, if you're going to do what Paul's going to tell Timothy, you're a partaker, that means that there's part of this that belongs to you. You're going to partake of that. You're going to be involved in that. Now, because of the Spirit, here's what's happening. And let me just do this to kind of end this session up. Because of the spirit of fear that the policy of evil has produced in Timothy, he has been shying away from the sufferings. It's made him timid. That's a good word. Instead of knowing, and just thinking, I know this is coming my way and I'm equipped to handle this, they've made him have some reservation. He's balked at that a little bit. Paul tells Timothy, don't shy away. He doesn't say don't shy away. He says be a partaker. And to do that means he's reminding him, God has given you the privilege. This is the fellowship of Christ's sufferings. He's just reminding Timothy that he's not only going to respond to this according to the power of God, which is right there in the passage, but it's a privilege to be able to do this. So look at this. In chapter 2, verse 3, thou therefore endure hardness as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. That is what that's what he's telling Timothy to do in view of this. Now, there's something else here. Later on, where's my marker? Later on, this is not what Timothy wanted to hear in his human thinking. Right now, he's supposed to endure hardness. Later on, Paul says, perilous times will come. Do you know what that means? It's gonna get worse. Paul is thinking, you got to get this right because there's something else coming. And when he calls it perilous times, he's talking about this is all going to get ratcheted up a level. Now, I know what you're thinking. If you're Timothy, you're going like, I just don't know. I just don't know. Has Timothy gotten everything he needs to go through this? He does. But you know what? Is it still possible for Timothy to get caught and for a period of time kind of get overcome with it and think, man, think of the sea billows. It's one after another. I don't know if you remember, when we went through a list of scriptures a session or two back, Paul talked about tribulations abounding. Do you remember that? There were he said, we are beset on every side. It was like, I'm not getting a break. If Job taught me one thing, Satan throws major things at Job, and he goes through that with flying colors. 3 friends show up, and because of their constant little drip on him over a period of days, Job cracks under the pressure. Sometimes it's not just the fact that it's a big thing, maybe it's because it's a not ceasing thing. And you're thinking, have you ever gotten under that and you thought in some circumstance, just give me a break for a minute. I'll deal with it, but give me a minute. Well, the policy of evil, you won't be able to make that plea to. And you know what's happening here? God is showing you just how bad. He's not telling you it will get that bad for you. He's saying it could. But if it does, there is still a way to go through this. To His arm. The power is still available. The endurance is still there. The policy of evil has the ability to kind of make you forget why you're in this battle. And it's kind of, I used to hear this saying and I thought, how does that possible? So I can't see the forest for the trees. It's that the things that are immediately happening to you have so much of your attention, you miss that bigger picture. That's what Paul's doing. He's bringing him back to that bigger picture. Now I need to finish these up, so let me just run through them very, very quickly. Because the goal of the doctrine is to get you through it without murmuring and complaining and whining and despairing and all of that kind of business. Oh, you know what? I thought I had something else to give you here. Why did I not have those? Let me just do it. The fundamental issues regarding suffering in the dispensation of grace. The doctrine in Paul's epistles is designed to give us a different perspective of suffering in this dispensation of grace. And suffering in this dispensation of grace, and in particular, the sufferings of Christ, is a privilege of God's grace. Now, I've gotten you almost to the end of the chapter. There's just a couple of verses that are left. And what we'll do when we get down there is, of course, I'm going to take you down and I'm going to show you that other category of suffering is sitting down in Romans 8. We'll pick it up here next time. You have a few more notes attached in your notes than where we've covered to, I think. But, and you can read through those, that's fine. But we're going to go through that when we return next time and keep going.